Hi everyone, welcome. Well, we sometimes get lucky and time the check-ins on some of my bins to correspond to milestone days, and well, that just didn't work out in this particular case. 3 days ago, this system reached its 100-day-old milestone. Not that that even really means much. It's all relative to so many different things, obviously, but either way, happy belated 100th day in service to the Red Wigglers, which, based on the little remnants here, you can tell where these worms were recruited from. These were the worms that used to occupy my outdoor worm bin version 5.0, which was famously covered with this piece of broken ornate plywood. The system here was where we recently tried to do a little bit of an interesting feeding style, which I've kind of coined as the pocket feeding approach, which is just sort of a corner feeding approach, alternating the location of the feeding zone into a different corner each time we come back. So to help us figure out where that last feeding was, we put down one of our traditional feeding zone indicators. Now, I do have a little stack of coffee filters just in case we need one. I think this one was actually placed in this folded position, double layer, onto its assigned location, meaning there would have been two layers for the worms to have had to have whittled away. And well, I don't really see much, but I think I see a clue right here. It looks like this well, it's pretty faint, perhaps a little bit tough to see, but there are some little ridges here that look just like the ridges that hold the folded over coffee filter in place. So it's almost like the old Hansel and Gretel story, right, where the kids try to lay down a breadcrumb trail in the woods so they can find their way home when they enter the dark, scary forest, and then the birds come by and nibble up all those breadcrumbs, leaving the kids lost in the woods. And then most people know what comes after that. I don't want to get into any scary stories here, but it becomes a pretty scary situation for those little guys. So the way we fed last time, perhaps that's the reason it was so popular over here in this corner, was because we reused all of this nice leafy matter that we had placed in even the previous time to last feeding as a nice top covering, and I really like that idea. So I think we're going to do the same thing. We're going to lay down a nice foundation of beautifully seasoned leaves for the worms, but no, not back into the place where they were fed last time. This is pocket feeding, so we're going in a clockwise order. So we'll get to this corner at the end to see about getting them their delicious meal of mainly cantaloupe, with one little hidden object in here that they're getting as a little bonus treat, which is an old tortilla. And following tradition, we'll normally start with checking in on the last feeding's status. I did breeze through the video last time, and I didn't pay much attention, but I do remember these frozen, leafy sort of stems of cauliflower or something like that. And I think there might have been something else, but those leafy bits really stood out in my mind. And here, down here, are the leaf bits, these sort of leaf bits, that we laid in on the bottom as the foundation for the last feeding. There's different schools of thought, which are to just not disturb the feeding zone in these sort of test scenarios too much, so that we can just very carefully and unintrusively check in on them, see how they're coming along, but then also leave things in somewhat an undisturbed condition so that in future check-ins we can see just what happens in the worm bin without us messing with it too much. But I'm really more about just getting in there and seeing what's going on. So either way, it did seem to me like this feeding zone from last time had really no leftovers of those, chunks of frozen leafy matter or stems or whatever they were. 12 days have gone by since the last feeding. And, 12 days for some nice frozen vegetable matter that just starts to get all gooey as it thaws out. Just doesn't stand a chance. These little wormies have been working hard, so we're just going to buzz through all the previous feedings. At this point, I know 12 days have passed since the last feeding. Now, how many days had passed between that feeding 12 days ago and the feeding that came before it, I don't know for sure. There's still a good many worms hanging out down in this corner. I don't know what was fed, but perhaps we'll bump into a leftover or two. I mean, when I bump into something that feels like this, which I believe is just a portion of a corn cob, very, very heavily worn down, I have to assume that that probably came with these worms from their previous environment. Being only 100 or so days old, corn cob would never get to that stage in that little time. I mean, we're now just into the unofficial start of summer, past the Memorial Day weekend, and where I live here in New Jersey, things are warming up. And that's when you start buying corn. Corn is sort of a summer treat where I live. Not sure if it's different elsewhere. So when you see corn cob, you can always kind of assume that they go many months back, unless it's summertime. So corn cob bits in my worm bins go back to last summer. Here's another corn cob bit. Something so obvious about it, when like a tubular object sort of splits down the middle, and now you have these two curved shapes. Here was half of a mango seed. That too looks like something that probably came with the worms from their previous home. How it got into this corner, I don't know. Whether I'm even correct or not, I'm not certain either, but whatever. As far as leftover goes in the corner, that goes back now 3 feedings. I don't really see anything that looks like leftovers. So we've been pretty good about trying to feed stuff that's not going to leave many leftovers, you know. I mean, bins this age could probably get fed stuff that's going to linger, because there's certainly going to be time for it to all get broken down. But you know, my worm bin feedings are sort of just luck of the draw, whatever's up next in terms of needing to get fed to the worms. This to me looks like chunks of, sort of like the one we saw earlier, that intact half of a mango seed that was still sort of holding together, that outer husk. These are just fragments of some of that stuff that I've already broken off. Here too, more corn cob bits. Yeah, I guess in the beginning when we launched these worms into this system, most likely with some of their old material from their old homes, we just sort of scattered any of those old leftovers that came with them, and they're just going to keep showing up, I suppose, in many future feedings, taking into account the pace at which they're breaking down. They're certainly not in a rush, or at least that's the way it seems to me. So I've created a nice little pocket into which we could place today's feeding, and the lovely bedding onto which we're going to place all that juicy melon rind. I don't know, I think it's going to, I mean, you know, we saw a nice turnout on those veggie leaves, or veggie stem leaves, or whatever. It's like, come on, you have a cauliflower and there's really thick bases of the leaves. I think it was some of that stuff. And there's even some yummy melon attached to this rind. And there's a good bit of it here. Pretty generous feeding. This probably would have even been a quantity of food sufficient to feed a couple worm bins. But this system does seem to be pretty capable of keeping up with our demands in terms of doing away with compostable stuff. So we're not going to stop at the melon. I've got some coffee here that needs to be done away with, and there's a little bit left in here, but I guess we could save that for some other future feeding, and then we'll be done with that as well. Other things I like to place down into the feeding zones are stuff like this pulverized eggshell, which helps the worms break down the foods that they eat, because they use it as a grit down in their gizzards. That's kind of a worm's stomach, you know, the gizzard. An organ somewhat different from our stomachs, but still same idea, you know, the place where the foods that they eat goes to get broken down by the body to be turned into energy. So that was fun. I wonder if our feeding zone indicators are going to continue to get attacked and destroyed the way we saw here this time. I mean, if we really got desperate, I suppose we could always go back to the videotape, right? We could always check in on the previous video to see exactly where we last fed, but to me it seems like 2 layers of paper like this should be able to withstand a couple weeks of worm activity in the bin. And I think part of the explanation for why the last one disappeared was because it was already a couple cycles in and pretty far gone by the time we got around to putting it on top of the last feeding, and for it to be gone at this point probably isn't too much of a mystery. Guess what? I like that leafy top cover approach so much, we're going to do it again. And perhaps we'll leave ourselves a secondary clue of where the feeding zone was by just not even covering the feeding zone with too many leaves, so that might also help it stand out just in case the feeding zone indicator gets gobbled up. So that's it for our check-in now with the red wigglers. Doing really nice in here, just beyond 100 days of age. Fairly young bin in my wormery, although I've already got 5 systems even newer than these. Launched in pairs, so it's not that impressive, but still. Yeah, that's it. Got our shade cover on, got the plastic coverings. All I got left to do here is just to clean up a few things and put stuff away, but I'm not going to keep you around for that. That's boring. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.